Hello, everybody. How are you? We'd like to welcome you to this installment of our author feature today, our writer feature for Poetry Society of Virginia. I am Miko Marsh. I'm one of the co-editors for the Poetry Society of Virginia newsletter. My other co-editor is Gray Hughes. You'll see some of his work or hear from him on another time. Joining us today is Derek Kannemeyer. So I'm going to read just a little bit of him because we're going to learn more about him in a bit. Derek Kannemeyer was born in Cape Town, raised in London, and has spent most of his adult life as a writer, teacher, and actor in Richmond, Virginia. He holds a BA from London University and an MA from UVA. His poetry and prose have appeared in scores of publications from Fiction International to Rolling Stone. In 2018, he won the inaugural chapbook contest offered by the Irish journal Blue Nib. In 2019, he published The Play of Gilgamesh, available for licensing from Silver Birchington Plays. And he also has a full-length poetry collection called Mutt Spirituals from the San Francisco Bay Press. He has quite a few other accomplishments, including the photography nonfiction project, Unsay Their Names. You can see an image here of one of his photographs that's in there. Kirkus Reviews named his photography nonfiction project, Unsay Their Names, about the fall from grace of Richmond's Lost Cause statuary to its list of the 100 best indie books of 2022. The photographs were featured fall 2022 exhibition at the Black History Museum of Virginia. He also has a second poetry chapbook, Found Voices, consisting of 10 verse monologues. It was recently accepted by Claire Songberg's publishing house. And he's currently working on a hybrid project called Stalk and Crawl Rollies, which we will let him explain. With Poetry Society of Virginia, you may have seen him around. He's been a member since 1990. He served as Central Region Vice President, Societary Parliamentarian, President Pro Tempore, and briefly as president. He's won a few dozen awards in the annual contest, including maybe 15 first place ones. He served as a judge for the Poetry Out Loud contest at every regional level, from his own classroom to the state finals. And I am excited to speak with you today because you were probably one of the first official people that I got to know, or at least hear from, when I joined Poetry Society in 2020. That was quite a year with a lot of disruption, loss, and everything else. And I had no idea what to expect from anything. And basically that first point of contact, hearing from you with information about what to expect, what was coming, and just kind of a warm welcome really was like a bright spot for me. And that left quite a memory for me. So it was kind of, oh yes, Poetry Society, you should join. You should join. They're so nice. They're so welcoming. So Derek, I would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy, busy schedule to speak with us today.
Yeah, and I remember, I think, contacting you about the contest that year too. Was it that year that you won a prize in that?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. So, oh my gosh. Wow, I hardly know where to start here, but in looking at the history and all the things that you have done, I think it will benefit others as well as it did for me to kind of hear about people's life experiences, to know how we all came to this writing journey. Sometimes there's a frustration that beginning writers have, that they believe that everybody's been doing this their whole lives, or that there's a certain path to take. And I like to hear from people what their path is so that we all know there's no one way up the mountain. So yeah, I've read that you live not just in 3 countries, but on 3 continents. It's like, so could you please tell us a bit about yourself and the path that led you to Virginia?
Yeah, okay. And you're right. Of course, life experience actually is one of the things which makes you a writer, meaning that you often writers are jostled about a bit or have things which they need to deal with. But I think that's true of all the arts. Let me sort of say a little bit about my background then. As you said, I was born in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm mixed race of a mixed race family, meaning that my parents were both mixed race, and there's also it's a generational thing in South Africa, and at some point, blending between the races got discouraged. And about the time I was born, it became a crime, meaning that the apartheid government came into power and started passing all kinds of laws, including one which was called separate group areas, which meant that the house where we were living was designated to be in a white area, and we were a colored family, and so we could no longer live there. My father made arrangements to buy another house, and that area was declared whites only. And at that point, we got out and came to England, which was possible at the time because uh, England was still part of the common. I mean, South Africa was still part of the British Commonwealth, and so we had right of citizenship there. So I started out as a South African citizen, then I became a British citizen and was raised in London from the age of 6. And because I studied French as well as English in college, I'd already arranged by the time I finished college to be spending a year in France. And while I was in France teaching, I met an American girl who I married and who was happy in Europe for maybe a couple of years and then said, I'm going home. Are you coming? And I ended up yeah. So that comes that so this is now my fourth country after France and my third nationality because I was never a French national. And all that kind of change is very healthy ground for a writer to speculate or I mean to write about his life experience. Obviously, it's a rich thing, but of course we've all got things in our life like that. And I guess in terms of what brought me to being a writer, it's just something in you, I think. And I started very young. I did start very young when I was about 16, but even that early, I was not that interested in doing it professionally. I was always kind of interested in the life of the mind or something, and just sort of writing for myself, which I think is ideal for a poet. You only have so many public expectations if you're going into poetry. And I remember when I was speaking to, as one of those career counselors when I was maybe 15, and they asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I said, well, I want to be a writer, but not professionally. I think I'll be a teacher, but I won't be an English teacher because that's what my father is. I think maybe I'll be a language teacher. And it's terrible having said that at 15 or 16, and then that's what you've actually done with your life, because for years, I just wrote and wrote and wrote, but I was teaching. And so although I was publishing some of it, I was putting most of it away in drawers. And now that I'm retired, I can pull it out and start doing stuff with
Yeah.
it. So anyway, that's a brief thing, Mika.
Yes, well, because I was wondering, I was like, South Africa and London and France, and you're gonna meet in America. Like of all the places, of all the nationalities, of all the people you could have met, you meet
Yeah,
somebody who's not in any of the countries that you lived in.
yeah, yeah.
And then he said, that's the one, you know.
Well, my goal before I met her was to live all around Europe. I was going to live in every country in Europe and and learn every language. She hijacked that. Well, that's okay.
Hey, sometimes goals, plans get derailed, and it's like, you know
Yeah.
what? This is a better spot than where I
Yeah,
like
it's
this. I
okay.
like
It's
this.
okay. So anyway, yeah.
So, now I've read somewhere that you were an accountant for a while.
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay.
did do that. And the thing is, Miko, that when I graduated from college, which I did in English and French, I knew that I had a place in France coming up in a year. So I basically had a killer year. And,
Okay.
so what I did was I lived with my parents for another year, first year out of college, and I worked in London as an accountancy clerk is what they were called, meaning
Okay.
that It's kind of halfway between bookkeeping, and it was actually kind of the first job that I did was as an accountant was only about 2 months, and it was deadly boring. But it was in a brewery, which was kind of wild because they used to give you beer breaks at 10 o'clock. Sorry, they used to give the men beer breaks at 10 o'clock. The women had coffee breaks, and they had a 3 pint limit. You couldn't drink more than 3 pints. Oh, that job was so stuffy. I couldn't stand it. So I left that one, another accountancy job for a travel agent, which I did for about 6 months before getting a teaching job. And that one was great fun because it was creative accounting. They hadn't looked at their books properly for years. And so they brought all these accounts clerks in. Most of us were in our 20s to try and sort out stuff. And their records were so shoddy that we were basically making stuff up and then sort of telling the client. And the client would say, "That's not what I owe. This is what I owe." And so we said, "Oh, okay." And so we figured out it was a lot of fun. But then I got a job teaching. And so accounts was kind of similar to what I did when I first came to Virginia, a kind of a side trip. When I first came to Virginia, I worked in hospitals and I did that for 3 years. But I always knew I was going to go back to teaching. Always knew I was going to go back to English and French. So, writers do that stuff. They sort of they explore other things, So I've had any number of temporary jobs, but the two which I had longest apart from my main jobs were in accountancy and in hospitals. Yeah, but that's
Okay, so your heart was already in teaching, so you just it was just like until you got to it. Okay.
yeah, exactly. Sort of it was always where I knew I was going. It was just a sidestep.
Okay. So when did you say you started picking up French?
I studied in high school just like everybody else in
Okay.
school. And it was an area, languages are an area of interest to me because frankly, you study literature when you study languages.
Mm.
And so I took English, French, and German as my specialties in high school. In England, you specialize after the age of 16. Um, Not a system I'm crazy about, really. I do like the American system of sort of having a broader education. But yeah, so sort of I did English, French, and German, and then I wanted to keep doing languages, and I did. I've always been interested in learning languages, and as I said, I would have loved to live all over Europe and learn all of them, but
Yeah. I
but I
took
just
a
live.
yeah, I took a class in college. I cannot remember what it was, but it was dealing with how we got our languages, how we got our English language and some of the words that were coming through, just kind of understanding the root words and how it
Yeah.
kind of I wish I could remember what it was called so I could go back and refresh periodically. But I think I'm just gonna join a club and just work on, picking up something later.
Well, it's one thing they say about learning languages. It sort of opens up a whole new world. I knew people who were completely different personalities in English than in French and spoke the two languages. And you sort of open up a whole new world of experience and of way of looking at the world by learning another language. I think it's really cool. Anyway, recommend it to everybody.
So, how many languages do you speak?
Oh, no, only English and French. I mean, my German at the time when I was 20 was okay, but it's not anymore, you know.
Okay. Okay. So, do you have work available in other languages and do you translate since you?
I translate from French. I do that for pleasure, and I do that. I've published a few things translating from French, mostly poetry, but I've also done a lot of short play translation from French. But as for writing in French, for pleasure and also for my classroom, I used to do that a lot. In terms of publishing it, I'm not sure I've published anything I've written in French except one poem. When I was over at a writers' colony in France um, working on just my own writing, we
Mhm.
had to give readings, and I would translate whole batches of my stuff into French so I could read it to the people there. But I also wrote a few things in French while I was there, and one got published on the city website. I'd forgotten all about that until I saw your interview questions, and I thought, where is that poem? I can't find it anymore, but I can find my rough translation. Anyway, so no, the answer is that that no. If I'm writing in terms of publication, rather than for the classroom or for myself, it's going to be in English. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But from French, yes.
So I started looking through the titles. Well, I mean, we're gonna need a couple titles soon, but
Yeah.
I came across one. What's it called? A Beta Bestiary.
Yeah.
And I had, the forever student in me was like, I've got to get this story. I've got to get it. So I got my Kindle edition so I could flip through it real fast. And I like the way it's set up, and I could tell I was like, this is definitely like teacher information because it's that information presentation and the wordplay and the poem in it, and you can follow very easily. And because the first thing that caught my attention, because I thought it was all gonna be like prose in this, and it took me a minute to get to the information. And it's like, oh, okay, this is the way it's laid out. And I was reading about the armadillo, and I always thought of it like a big roly poly, and it was, I was just like a big thing with a little shell just walking. And the idea that this thing could jump over 3 feet, and I'm imagining myself standing in the road and this thing jumping. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, what is that? And why is it moving? Why is it like almost, up here? So it 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 called me. It was like, I'm gonna have to read on these. But you have several things that are kind of unexpected with that. So could you tell us about your titles and
Yeah.
what each of them offers?
Yeah. Well, a better mastery, first of all, was, sort of an outgrowth of something which I started in a long time ago. Um, I went through a period where I needed a break from writing about myself in poetry. And for 5 years, honestly, I wrote nothing except poems and short stories about animals which began with the letter C. And I had a list of like 400, and that was called Sea Beasts, and maybe sometime I'll publish those too. But what it got me excited about that was also researching all these animals. As you say, so you look up and you find these surprising things about animals, and you say, "Oh, that is so cool." And with the Better Bestiary book, I refined that into sort of this research about animals, and then just writing 4-line poems, and that was a lot of fun. But with the armadillo, that's both a great scare tactic and a defense mechanism. Get away and also startle. Anyway, so there's tons of things like that. And with the Better Bestiary, that really something I've never stopped doing. You could go into faculty meetings and sit and be bored and write little 4-line poems or think of rhymes for them, and you always have these. So that was always something which I like to write in the margins. In terms of the serious collections, did you ask me about my what books I have available? Is that what
Mhm.
you were? Yeah. So okay. So the first serious poetry collection I published was Mutt Spirituals, which is mostly autobiographical poems, but not all that, where the concentration is often about the other and about being an outsider. And a lot of that is about me too and my growing up, always feeling as an outsider, sort of because, sort of you're a minority in terms of whatever you'd care to look at. If you're a mixed race South African, you're especially a minority, meaning that there's not many. It's located in mostly you're located in Cape Province, and you're trying to decide where you fit. And then growing up as one of the first generation of non-white people in England, as the population, the first wave of immigrants after the war. And then, sort of in America, frankly, it's been way less important than anywhere else I live, because this is a melting pot and people don't know how to place me. But everywhere else I've lived, I really felt like, sort of an outsider. And so that book is about the other. And it's called Mutt Spirituals because I am a mutt. And not that I think that that's unsurprising in this country. I think a lot of people are. And the spirituals thing is, sort of about trying to find the holiness in all our relationships and in the world. So yeah, so that was my first book. And at the same time, I was also working on other things. I published a play called The Play of Gilgamesh before I published Mutt Spirituals. Then I had a second full-length poetry collection called You Go In by the Gate Which Isn't There. This one, which is
I'm sorry. Could you
mostly
hold it
about,
up a little bit? Could you
yeah,
hold it up
sorry.
again for the?
You
Okay.
go in by the gate that isn't there.
Okay.
And that's largely, again, autobiographical, but it sticks to my life before the age of 25. And it mostly features, not mostly, but a good percentage of it is stuff which I wrote in my 20s. And so that's earlier poems generally than the poems in Mutt Spirituals. Often less polished and more florid, but things which I still found interesting. I got an offer from a press in India, which said, do you have a collection? And so I put that one together because I otherwise wouldn't have published those things probably. Some of it does have some newer things in it, and I'm very happy with it. So those two. And then, as you said, I've got a chapbook which isn't out yet, which was just accepted, and which I haven't signed a contract on yet because they only just let me know. So I don't know anything about when it will be available. But Found Voices is 10 monologues, which sounds like it's short, but the monologues are long. There are two 10-page poems in there, and it's like 40 pages altogether. They're all longer poems. And I really am glad to have that out because it is so different from the other two, meaning that it is all stories told from the point of view of somebody who is not me. And I do have a few of those in both the other books, but I'm glad to have a book of completely that. So that's the poetry. And then I've got a novel called The Memory Addicts, which I'm very fond of too, which came out the same year as Unsay Their Names, which, sort of is the book which is probably the most public writing that I've done, although the novel comes close. And then so those are the ones which are out. I think I've mentioned everything except that I've got um, lots of books which have more limited availability, which combine poetry and photography, or poetry or photography and light verse, which I have made available on a more short-term basis. Here's one called Flap Over Tree Debris Island, which I've sold several copies of, but maybe 20 or 30, but is really no longer available, and which is light verse and animal verse again, but this time coupled with photography. Yeah. So I guess that's it in terms of
Would you,
what's already out there.
well,
Yeah.
would you like to share some? Would you like to share a selection?
Oh, sure, sure, sure. Let me. Okay, this is from the next book. I really wanted to read something if I was going to read something which I hadn't read before, because you get so much from it. And during the COVID years, I've stopped doing readings,
Yes.
but I also wanted to do something that was published. And so because I stopped doing readings during the COVID years, there are a bunch of things which I published which I haven't ever read. This was one of the ones which won a contest, won the Poetry Society contest first place, and which I've never read. I think that probably Jeff Hewitt must have read it at the contest, because we read the winning poems. So that's actually kind of a nice thing about it too. It's called Tickling Her. In the backyard grasses, a boy with yellow hair wriggles his quick trickling fingers under the t-shirt hem over the short spelt of a girl he has known forever, for 10 years, even 11. And as she shrieks, laughs, and squirms, almost shoves a little, though not so hard as to hurt him, not even enough to move him off of her, he is tickling her, and is tickling her. She laughs for him, but she is thinking, what if there were a bee right now, trapped inside the den's storm window, which she might twist her face away to watch, to not be there, just to let him. The boy, only a boy, nervous and winging things also, feels her slipping away from him. He slows the scurry of his hands, but can't seem to lift them from her skin. What he wants is so close to this, is so almost this, yes, so not this. What she wants is so not this, yet so almost this. Look, she wants to say, look, Joey, until he'd stop and turn, surprised by his relief at stopping. And they could laugh together to see a bee peer back, bobbing and fumbling at its pale, impossible puzzle of blue sky. Thank you. That's a little narrative poem.
I I was I was watching, I was thinking, I could see it. I could see it. So yes, I was like, oh,
Yeah, those
that
bee
moment
trapped.
that then it's like, okay, we're still going. All right, so cute. So so
Growing up is so hard.
but it's at that, like, it's so many different ages that it still fits, because you still play as an adult. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not quite,
yeah,
not
yeah,
quite
yeah.
together yet, but trying to get together still. So yeah. Oh,
Yeah, it's like a bee trapped inside a window, like inside a store window. It's there, but I'm anyway. Yeah, so that one, I think there are models I use sometimes, and there's a Galway poem, Galway Canal poem called "Kissing the Toad," which you steal structure, I think sometimes, and that's also about a young a young boy girl kind of flirtation where the boy gives the girl a toad to kiss. And she's holding the toad and saying, "Am I going to kiss it or not?" And so I stole that, a lot of that from that idea from that. Of course, it's a completely different interaction, but it's the same kind of feel.
yeah. Yes, yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, I wanted to highlight your Kirkus review and
Yeah.
some of the other things that you've done here. So I will include the link so that people can um, read the article that Kirkus Reviews wrote on you.
Uh-huh.
Congratulations on being selected for the 2022 Best Indie Books of the Year.
Thank you.
I'll include that link too, so y'all can see that.
Thank you.
Now, considering that you've won multiple contests
Yeah.
and you have participated in a variety of things, I know all of these have had to mean something to you, like being printed in
Yeah.
Rolling Stone, even uh, your
Uh,
first publication, having a manuscript placed in the finals for a Virginia Prize for Poetry. Are there any one or two that stand out to you, and why?
Yeah, sort of it's hard for me to pick one over the other. The first publication was a thrill. And so was everything I've ever done in terms of sort of, oh, that wins. And it's never, I don't want to dwell on that because in fact, as much as all of those have meant to me, and as much as it means to have put out real books with my name on them, you always hope that it's going to be. I'm always just looking forward. I'm always hoping that the next thing is going to be the one which, oh, and it won't be, but it will be temporarily while you're working on something that should be, I think, always the thing you're most excited about. But in terms of finally getting something out with my actual name on a complete book, which I think in terms of printed was much spirituals actually, because the chapbook was only a chapbook, it's not a full-length book. And then I had the Play of Gilgamesh out, but that's available for licensing and they print it if you want to produce it. It's not, sort of you can't hold it in your hand. So I think the first thing that I could actually hold in my hand was much spirituals. And that mattered to me, especially as, you know, I've had a couple of experiences with fortune tellers. And one when I was in my 20s, and I asked, when will I publish a book? And they said, sorry, I can't see that in your future. So, so
Yeah.
you so the first one meant something. But yeah, no, it was a real thrill to be on that best 100 best indie books of the year, and to have the novel out, and to have the first poetry book out, and they all are. But you're always hoping the next one will be even bigger.
It's like you live in the moment and you're pouring yourself in, and
Exactly.
then it goes to completion.
Yes, and I'm terrible about that. So that once things go to completion, I tend not to do enough to support them. I want to go on to the next thing. Yeah, just throw it out the
Writer
world.
mind. It's
Next
it's a
thing.
writer thing. It's a writer
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we had a couple more questions. So I know that you have actively participated in PSB events and have
Yes.
held office positions. Now,
Mhm.
how did you come to join PSB? How did you get involved? And then what might you say to newer members or members that aren't aware of the opportunities within our organization?
I think it's important for every writer to have a support group, um, and um, the Poetry Society of Virginia can certainly be that. Now, I have to say that when I joined, which was in 1990, it was, first of all, because of the contests. I wanted to enter the contests, which I didn't do all the time for every year, but I did several times in the 90s. A couple of times I judged in the 90s and the early aughts. But what also mattered was to me was regional meetings. And COVID has kind of put a damper on that. But what we do have now is we have more Zoom meetings. And I really liked going to when, say, Shan Palmer was the regional vice president for my region, which is the central, or Ron Smith was. They would hold gatherings, and we
Mhm.
would actually get together and get to meet and hang out with other people from our area. Now we still have the festival, which is the whole state, but sort of with a regional meeting, you get to meet the other people around you, and we can still do that to some extent with the Zoom. But that kind of getting together with other members and having a writer support group. And it opens doors for you, and it also helps you with your own writing in terms of giving people feedback. But it opens doors for you because people then invite you to read. People then say, "Come to this gathering," and it really can benefit you a lot. In terms of being more active, than just attending things. I have to be honest and say I was asked to, for example, serve um, as an officer for a long time before I was able to do it. I just couldn't do it and teach. And so I became regional vice president the year I went to part time. I think I was three-quarter time. So I was almost full time as a teacher. But while I was teaching full time, there was just no way I could. And I do worry sometimes about how officers of our society tend to be older and how that kind of sometimes prevents younger people from joining because we look like we um, tend older. But that's only because people don't really have the time. And I wish that we could do it so that um, people could take more of a leadership role younger and that we would continue to trend younger. Um, but I do think that we have started making some moves in that direction, especially by being more open to slam poets and performance poets than we were at one time. Um, and I think the society has a healthy role to play. And I would really encourage, and what, with youth laureates and with more local laureates, and with, as I said, with more online stuff,
Mhm.
there are more opportunities than ever for us to get together and grow in that way. So
Those are some good points. This time is is a major factor for a lot of folks.
yeah,
Actually, I think all of us, because like we're still managing it. Um,
yeah.
so we've got a couple minutes left.
Mhm.
Um, so before we go, what projects do you have?
Yeah.
Like what can we expect? How can we find you?
Okay. My website is called petalridge.com. Um, and it's deliberately a maze and a folly, meaning that there is a ton of stuff on there. I've got a log of for example, of the fiction that I wrote when I was in the 1980s, when I was writing a lot of short stories and publishing them. They've got short plays, they've got song lyrics, it's got a whole section on puzzles. because I also
Mhm.
like to write puzzles. And I wish that people would go and visit and just sort of explore it because and it's got a lot of photographs too, because I also do a lot of photography, as well as poetry. So it's a place that you could go actually and spend time and not really come to the end of. But I don't think really people visit other people's websites like that. But I really like to hang out on my own.
Yeah,
So
I
just
visit
wanted
websites.
to-
It's like I think we do. Just may not necessarily say something, but at
yeah.
least I do. I do a lot of I was like, what can I find now? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So anyway, so I've got that. But in terms of projects and what's coming up next, um, well, I don't know when Found Voices will come out, and I'm sure that I'll work more on that before it comes out. But what I'm working on in terms of new writing, I've got a book at an editor at the moment called Stalking Crawl Rollies, which you mentioned, which is a wildly hybrid thing, and which I'm quite excited by. Um, and which I really have no knowledge about how it will affect other people, meaning that it's um, a 100-page nonsense poem in the style of Lewis Carroll,
Mhm.
couched in uh, maybe 80 photographs and an equal number of pages of prose in academic spoof mockumentary style, and it's a space opera. I don't have a single friend, I think, who I could say, read this, and they'd go, "Ooh."
It's
It's kind of limited in what its appeal might be, the range of its appeal, but it really appeals to me. Anyway, so I've got that,
so
and I'm
that
also
is that is a new thing that we can expect from you.
yeah.
So that'll be
I'll
cool.
show you a kind of a trial cover maybe if I can
Okay.
find one.
Well, my Zoom is about to cut out in like the next 45 seconds. Oh, okay.
Okay,
Yes.
that's it.
But
Yeah, and the other thing is the next poetry book, which is called Sort by Title. Yeah.
so we
Anyway,
will include your website, petalridge.com, with the
right.
links. Feel free to come back. Y'all check out Derek Kannemeyer. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you Miko, for
Thank
this
you for
long
being our
chat.
feature for
I know
this
that we're
edition. All
about
right. Y'all
to.
take care. Y'all have a good evening. We'll talk to you next
Yeah,
time.
I
All
will
right.
come to the next Poetry Society of Virginia contest ceremony.
All right. Bye bye.